So the very first week that we started this series, OverTime, we looked and tried to understand the value of time over time. And it was illustrated in understanding that there is a number to our days. There's a number to the weeks that we have from birth to high school. There's a number, honestly, on every single one of us. There will be one day where that day was the last day. And we had to learn to value what we can fit, what we can manipulate, what we can choose to put into our days. And we heard from Moses in Psalm chapter 90, verse 12. He said, "Teach us to number our days so that we may gain a heart of wisdom." God, would you teach me to understand that there's value in a day? God, would you teach me and understand that there's power and there's importance in knowing that time is a limited resource. God, would you help me to learn how to develop, to invest, to be intentional with my time over time. And then last week, we talked about the lampstand and that its purpose was to shine the light on the bread, on the shewbread, the bread of life. The purpose of the lampstand we found was connected to the purpose of the church. And when the church moves away from its purpose, when we move away from being the people that are shining the light on the goodness of Christ, we find ourselves not doing the things that God desires us to do. Jesus said, "When I am lifted high, when I am lifted up from the earth, I will draw all people to myself." If we will just learn how to keep the light in its proper spot, if we will just know how to keep it in its proper place, shining on the right things for the right reasons, we will find that Jesus does the heavy lifting, that people are drawn to him because of the hope, because of the forgiveness, all of those things that are found there. So we landed on this thought: as FBC properly shines the light, over time, the next generations will see him with clarity. We are to use our days, to use the most of our days, to use it wisely. And as a church, we are to keep the light shining on its proper place, on Jesus, not moving the lamp away from the bread of life. So last week, as we looked at the church, this week we're going to look at ourselves. We're going to look at family. Now, all of us have family. Some of us display our family proudly. We see them every holiday, every celebration, and it brings a smile to your face. But others of us may have a little bit more of a difficult experience when you talk about family. So the question I want to ask today is, what is the role of family in our faith? What is the role of our family when it comes to our relationship with Jesus? Now, by God's design, the family was meant to grow, it was meant to care for, and it was meant to love one another. We all know, or maybe have lived stories that support that this is true. So the statement I want to bring for you today is that Christian families show the love of Jesus over time, leaving a legacy of faith. Because I know this is true for my kids. I'm not going to leave them a lot of money. I just know that I'm not going to leave them a huge inheritance. But everybody leaves a legacy. And once we learn that what I leave in my children is more important than what I leave for them, when I learn that what I leave in my children is more important than what I leave for them, we come to the realization that money will come and money will go. But the only thing that lasts is what we find inside a person, what builds their character, how they can have a right relationship with God. And I'll tell you, that right relationship with God doesn't begin in the church. It begins at home. In Deuteronomy chapter 6, we find this instruction in how to raise up our children in the ways of God. In Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 4 through 9, it begins like this. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one God. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. These words, what words? They were the words that were of God's law. They were the words of how to live righteous and holy before God. These words that I command to you today, they shall be on your heart, that you shall love God with everything that you have, with all the might that you have, with everything. And you shall teach these things, these teachings, diligently to your children, without fail. You shall intentionally teach your children. You shall talk of them when you sit in the house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise. We are to be intentional about how we engage our kids. And let me be honest, in how we engage our spouse when it comes to our relationship with God. You shall bind these things. You shall bind these words on your hand. They shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You should see these words in the work of your hands and with the things that you see. You shall write them on the doorpost of your home for when people come in or when they leave, and on the gate to your house. As you enter in, you should have the words of God permeating it all. But here's the thing. Anybody that's raised kids, any woman who's tried to raise a husband knows that sometimes it doesn't work, right? Sometimes we tend to approach our life and our most important relationships as if our only goal is to make that person, that child, happy. We somehow think that our whole goal is for them to have a smile on their face, to look back and say, you know what, I was just happy. But I know how much discipline I need. And I know how many whoopings I deserved. Might need one today, who knows? But see, we don't like it when our kids are in a bad mood. And in fact, we give in. And an example of this is one that we just talked about a couple of days ago. There was a point in time where we had no idea how to help one of our kiddos get along and deal with unmet expectations. And we talked about how we would go separately to a store. And the only way we made it through the store was to make a beeline to where the Hot Wheels were. Because if we at least got a Hot Wheel for that day, we didn't get the ear-piercing scream and all of the bad looks from all of the people that go, what are you doing to that baby? You must be the worst parent in the world. And we talked about it, and we said, you know what? For a little while, I thought I was the only one that was doing that. But what we had figured out is that separately, we had been trained. We had been trained to help our little one feel happy for just a moment. But it may not be that. It may be in, you know what? It's fine. Just watch another show. Yeah, I don't care if you have a soda, rot your teeth, whatever. It's fine. We'll get dentures later. You know, yes, we'll have McDonald's because I really don't want to cook anyway. But when we make those choices, it's not because we're thinking down to the end. It's because we're thinking right in that moment. Because this is true. You don't want your kids to be spoiled. You just want them to be happy. But in giving them those things that they think make them happy, what do you create? A spoiled child. But you're not alone in this. There's an entire marketing industry that is aimed in helping you to believe that the idea of life is to make your kids happy. Around, Christmas or Valentine's Day, we get the marketing message, sir, your job is to make your wife happy. Buy this diamond, right? Christmas, your goal is to make your spouse happy. Buy them this Lexus, right? We've seen the commercials, and we know that there's an entire group of people that sit around and say, how can I make somebody believe that they're unhappy, then show them that buying things makes them happy? As if the only goal in our life is to pursue happiness for ourselves, for our children, for our spouse. But as we chase after these things that honestly become a vapor, at some point we cross the line. At some point we step past being helpful. At some point we step past meeting a need, and then we cross the line. But it's not always easy to tell. It's not always obvious. Because sometimes a fascination can become an obsession. Sometimes it's in chasing after the small things and bringing up a hobby or some other activity that we introduce into their lives, this fascination that becomes an obsession. The things that are casual become all-consuming. And when we chase after those things, we threaten the very thing that makes them come to life. When we chase after happiness, when we chase after stuff, we replace the pursuit of God with other things. And we introduce competing values. We pour on and say, I had good intentions. And those competing values and those good intentions crowd out what is most important in our life. We become relationally poor in pursuit of being experientially rich. In attempting to do what is best, we trade for what's essential. So in many ways, like the church, a family, a person, a family can move the lampstand from its original position. We can find ourselves focusing on things that aren't important. We trade an active pursuit, an active relationship for a temporary pursuit. So I chose today to illustrate family with a big heart, right? And love. Because honestly, when you think about the relationship of a family, it's shrouded and covered in this hopefulness of an unconditional love. A relationship that is solid, that runs through the course of time. But so many times we actively pursue things that are temporary, like diving deep into a hobby, or giving power to others who will determine the way that we spend our time away from our families. But we don't see it all the time because we place things in the way of the relationships that we had always said will be a priority. Do you remember when you stood and maybe saw her for the first time. Or you stood at an altar and you repeated those words, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer. You remember when you said that this relationship will be a priority. You remember when you held the little baby. Or, you know what? You know when you said to your parents, I want a puppy. I promise I will feed it. I promise I will care for it. I promise I will pick up after it. I will make it a priority. Do you remember how easy it was for those things to fade away? New pursuits come, a new hobby, a new something, right? Being late becomes, okay, it's just going to be one more time. Being late becomes the norm. We choose time out with friends over time with our families. We choose other distractions over our relationship with our spouse. Those things affect our marriage and they affect our kids because we fail to keep things in their proper perspective. So I wanted to share with you a list of things, about 5 things that I believe are imperative for me personally as a parent to keep in perspective. And the first one is this: my kids they should have an active relationship with God. Now, that sounds really good, but I'll tell you one thing, it means that I have to lead them there. They cannot go where I don't go. My kids cannot have an active relationship with God if I am not teaching them how to have one. My spouse needs me to have an active relationship with God. The second priority for my kids is that my kids will know that I will never stop pursuing them or fighting for a real relationship with them. Even at the times where they don't want to call you back. Even the times where they walk away. That I will never stop pursuing them. I will never stop fighting for that relationship. I will not stop pursuing them in love because our Heavenly Father, He's the one that showed us what it looks like to pursue in love over time. The third thing is this: my relationship with my wife affects my kids more than I realize. Because this is where they learn how to love and how to care for their spouse. Even in the times where liking is in short supply. How do I love when she doesn't like me right now? And this is where they learn to love, what lasting love looks like over time. What commitment looks like over time. Fourth thing, just being together is no substitute for interacting together in a healthy way. Just being in the same room is not the same as being together in a healthy way. Home is the training ground for all of life's relationships. And we need to help them to learn and grow in a tendency towards having healthy and happy, loving relationships. And the last thing is this: mom and dad are not the only adult influences my kids need. And this is where we understand the importance of church and family together in influencing and in growing the next generation. Because you know this is true. There's no shortage of seminars, of books, of blogs on creating a perfect family. Now, for those of you that are a little bit younger, you've never heard of a person named Dr. Spock. Well, not Star Trek Spock, but the other one that I'm not even sure he was a doctor. But he wrote this book that changed parenting for the worse, right? Unless it worked for you, and then I'm sorry. I didn't mean it. I meant it, but I didn't mean to offend you. Okay. There's no shortage of people trying to tell you how you're going to raise your kids and how you can have a perfect family. In fact, when you feel like you're the only one that doesn't have a perfect family. Because here's really what they're trying to tell you. When you look on Pinterest, when you look in somebody's social media feed, even when you watch certain movies, here's what they're trying to say. Your kids come home, and there's a hot meal on the table. The linens are pressed just so. The forks, the plates, the knives, the cups, they're all there. There might even be a candle on the table, but I tell you, everything is there. There's no need, and there's a happy, smiling mom and a proud dad. And they sit down and they have a perfect, holy conversation at the table. Oh, it's rich and it's deep. They say a perfect prayer. They bless the food. It's a perfect mannered kid, right? They say, please and thank you, may I? I'd love more vegetables. All of the great things, right? And we have this idea that brings shame into our lives that somehow our kids need to be perfect. That every activity we go into, every birthday party, every Christmas, every Thanksgiving needs to be something that you'd find on Pinterest. Something that you would find that is picture perfect. That everyone is posed just right. So you can brag to your friends on Facebook. So you can put the perfect Instagram filter on it. But let me take some stress off you. This doesn't happen every day or very often. In our family, some nights, it's leftovers, right? Some nights, it's sandwiches. Definitely paper plates. Sometimes, it's fast food. But it's only so we can get to the next thing. Sometimes, the dinner prayer is, please, Lord, help us get through dinner. One meal. God, I'm just asking for one meal without an argument. Listen, rough times come in our house. If you didn't know it, marriage is hard. Parenting is hard. Working is hard. Adulting is hard. And when we start to feel a little bit guilty because we see others that have it all together, I want you to take heart because there are not very many great parenting examples in the Bible. Now, there's plenty of advice. There are plenty of universal principles on how to raise children or how to guide children, but there are not very many exceptional parents. Let's start from the beginning. Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve. One of their sons murdered the other one. Is that good parenting? Say no. Okay, good. And by the way, they introduced sin into the world. Okay, I got it. Joseph and Mary. Obviously, they had to be the best parents. Because Jesus did turn out pretty well, right? He saved the whole world. So surely they were great parents. Now, they had the advantage of him being God's son. But remember, they lost him for a while. And they had to go back and look for him. They lost him for 3 days. Luke chapter 2, starting in verse 42. Now his parents, this is Mary and Joseph, went to Jerusalem every year for the feast of Passover. And when the feast had ended, they gathered up their stuff and they returned. But the boy Jesus stayed behind, and his parents did not know it. His parents did not know it. They went a day's journey, and they started looking around, and they said, I thought you had him. So after 3 days, they finally made their way back to Jerusalem and found him in the temple, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. And if this doesn't bring you any comfort, just know that every family has some sort of dysfunction, whether it's control issues or stubbornness, manipulation, insecurity, all kinds of other things. Every family has it. But is it because they're bad parents? It's because, to be honest, they're just human. You're just human. You are not the super mom. You are not the super dad. You are not the super spouse. Don't put on the cape, because you're just human. And humans tend to have human issues. Humans tend to struggle with the humanness of their own human parents and those things that were passed down. Just looking through the scriptures, you find out that Noah, well, he had a drinking problem. Abraham, he lied about his relationship with his wife. Rebekah helped her son to deceive her husband. Jacob's sons, well, they sold their brother as a slave. David had an affair, and his son started a rebellion against him. And Eli lost control of his sons and how they acted at church. So after those reminders, maybe you can sit back and go, you know what? I'm not doing that bad. And I think that maybe God placed those bad examples in the scriptures as possibly an encouragement to us. Maybe he knew that we needed that encouragement, that those examples would be an encouragement in our lives. Sometimes the perfect parenting we read about or hear about or perceive to be true gets in the way. And we start our day, we look at our family, we look at our relationship with our spouse, and we feel defeated. But we can be encouraged. We can be encouraged because God has a way of doing the incredible in spite of our faults. And every man should say amen, right? I often tell my boys this statement. It's my goal for them to be a better man than I am. I want my boys to be a better man than I am. I want my boys to be a better follower of Christ than I am. Now, I'm not a perfect example by any means of getting even half the things right, but I consistently try to improve day over day and year over year, because our hope is to build a legacy in our boys, which strengthens with each generation. And I believe this, that most parents desire to be better parents. And most spouses desire to be better spouses. Let me tell you something that's going to change your life. It's never too late to begin. Because small improvements over time equal significant changes. And then you add in the grace of God, you add in divine intervention in our heart, and anything is possible. Most parents, regardless of the baggage that they bring with them, have a desire and a capacity to improve. So our humanness does not prevent God from using us. Our humanness actually becomes a platform through which God displays his power. through which God displays his goodness, his love, and his redemption. The church and the family are made up of broken people through whom God has chosen to tell his story. God has chosen to use our brokenness. God has chosen to use our own stuff to help us, to show that he is the one that redeems. It's not on your power. It's not through what you do. It's through his work in you. Because God is telling the story of redemption through your family. Now, we don't always get it right, and God is continually calling us to participate in being part of the redemption that he's doing in you and in the world. So don't buy into a dangerous myth that has kind of circulated from the beginning of time, I'm pretty sure. You don't need to become the right kind of person before God can use you in others' lives. If you heard that from a church, I'm sorry. If you heard that in this church, I'm sorry. If you heard that from your parents, I'm sorry. If you heard it from your friends, I'm sorry. You don't have to become the right kind of person before God can use you. He uses you right where you are. You need to learn how to incorporate what God desires to do in your heart today so that your children will know. They will see redemption at work. So your spouse can see. So your family will have a front row seat to the grace and the goodness of God at work in life. But the first priority of the family should be to leverage the love of God over time in our relationships with one another. So I want to real quickly look at an example in Ephesians chapter 5 and 6. Ephesians chapter 5, starting verse 15. Look carefully then at how you walk. Pay attention, but not as unwise, but as wise, making the best of the time because the days are evil. Make the best use of the time because the days are evil. And understand what the will of the Lord is. Understand and be filled with the Spirit. Be filled with the Spirit, addressing one another in patterns and psalms and hymns and spiritual songs and singing and making a melody to the Lord with your heart. Giving thanks always for everything to God the Father in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ. Submitting to one another out of reverence for Christ from this beginning, that we should be filled with the Spirit, that we should sing a melody of praise to our Lord in our hearts. From that understanding, submitting to one another, he says, wives, submit to your own husbands as to the Lord. And husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church. And he gave himself up for her. And children, obey your parents. Obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. And it's in that context that we learn the proper relationship of love over time. That we learn the proper perspective that our obedience and our love applied through the grace of Christ will have a huge effect over time. So when we apply the love of Jesus over time, our most important relationships, will they thrive? Would you pray with me?